started early.
Yeah, I don't like the starting early. Hey, over there left.
Covert things were happening for 2 minutes
Right,
because we
we
started early.
voted on 50 actions in 2 minutes.
This is a committee. We do not vote in committees. Nothing that we say here
It's binding.
about selling a property in Thunderbolt.
She's not paying you
She
no
ain't
mind.
paying me no mind.
Connie, you not paying him no mind?
You got us hot? Oh, okay.
That's her way of saying stop cutting up, but stop having fun and enjoying each other.
Good morning and welcome to this inaugural meeting of the Finance Committee of the Savannah-Chatham County Public School System. I welcome everybody that is watching online and my fellow board members that were able to be here today. Mr. Katchmar sends his regards from Atlanta. He is doing continuing ed at the GSBA conference that some of us will be heading to right after this meeting. I will first ask for an approval of the agenda.
Sure, I'll move.
I'll second.
Thank you. All in favor of approving the agenda?
Aye.
Thank you. Our first order of business will be to discuss actually the committee purpose and goals and to allow a discussion from board members, also the superintendent's input on what we will want to see coming out of the finance committee. This is a slightly different committee than just the budget committee because we are now going to be able to look at anything that would actually utilize funds across the district. One of my priorities will definitely be the budget, but also I know that Ms. Grabowski has already expressed interest in looking at RFPs and that process. And then, of course, we will be able to fold in East Blast, but also looking and drilling down into every part of our budget and is it effective? So as I heard Mr. Jackson talking to Ms. Hall earlier, a lot of our committees overlap. So data and accountability figures out that one of our programs isn't working. What does that budget item look like? And the finance committee should then take that data from data and accountability and go, let's sunset this or let's continue this. So I would like to just open the floor up at first to other board members to see if they have any priorities they would like to see in the coming months. I am planning on making sure that we meet once a month at least with topics that will drive both our budget but also drive the financial responsibility of the board and district. Ms. Hall?
I'd like to ask Mr. Jackson if he would say to the whole board what he was saying to me in its entirety, and also, I'm not sure who the actual board members are who are on this committee with you, if we could find that out.
Okay, so in January, of course, I will be renaming all of the committees. But for right now, we carried over the people who are already on the budget committee, which is David, Sean, and Michael. But at the beginning of the year, we will name the full committee.
All right, thank you.
Okay. And
we're not doing any voting, so it doesn't matter.
No, there's no
today.
voting.
Okay.
And by the way, that is a reminder to all board members to please send me your desired
mine.
committee
Okay.
assignments. Thank you.
Does that mean we don't have to serve on any?
Nice try.
And Mr. Brinkman, the other thing is that the equity committee, if we're to get equity as we need it, that means resources are available to allocate. So I'm very happy to see that this is going to be more comprehensive than just the budget committee.
Yes, and I think you hit it right on the head, Mr. Brinkman, brought it to the floor, that's what we want this committee to understand and the rest of the board, is that as we get reports throughout the year from all of the committees, staff incorporates all of that during the budget process. So we use bits and pieces from all of the committees to put the budget together. And I think historically, I don't think the board realized that that's what we normally do. So it probably gave the appearance that we were not given enough information during the budget process, but in our minds, information was given in other committees. So we want to make sure that we include all of the committees that have something that's presented that's relevant to the budget process or to the Finance Committee. We're going to try to include those items in our presentations for the Finance Committee, as you will see in a few minutes. But we really want to make sure that the board understands it's more than just the Finance Committee that's going to be a part of this process.
So you were all sent the Finance Advisory Committee description.
Yes,
And
draft form. Draft form.
Yeah, and I was speaking with Kurt this morning, and that was a suggestion that is not the actual policy. Because there were a couple of things that were in there that I thought, one was that the committee is chosen by the superintendent, and that is not so, okay? The other one, and I had spoken to you guys about this, and I think I got an overwhelming sense of how you felt about this. The other part was that we would also have community members on this committee. And my response I had gotten before was that we would not, that this is strictly a board committee. Am I clear? Yes.
Yes, that is correct, based on my understanding and experience. I think maybe the origin of that error is that we used to have a recreation committee, and that was one of the committees, not recreation, what was it? Health and wellness? Somebody help me. Okay, health and wellness. And that was a superintendent committee. It was a committee that was populated primarily by staff.
Got it,
And
got
so
it.
it was appointed by the superintendent, but it wasn't a board committee. But we, because of the recess issues that kept coming up
Right,
and
right.
we ended up kind of changing that around. But yes, it is correct that board committees that are populated by board members are appointed by the president. That was the only exception I was aware of.
Okay, all right.
To get discussion rolling, I will jump from finance to the big picture, the budget. One of the presentations we're going to get is the budget process, and I've already given Ms. Cooley heads up that, and I feel in conversations we've had over the last couple months and in previous years that the board has wanted to pass the budget earlier. I don't know how the superintendent feels, so I'm not going to put her on the spot right away unless she wants to. But I would like to pass the budget next year in May. And I'd like to work to even try to make that earlier. Our district for a long time has always coupled passing the budget with passing the millage. And I believe, this is my thoughts only, is that we have figured out what we're going to get in taxes, and then we budget from that instead of budgeting from our priorities and our goals and what we believe is working in our district and what we believe is not working in our district. And I would like to see this committee moving forward in forming a budget based on the superintendent's priorities, where she sees things needing to go, and the board's priorities on what we believe need to be funded, make a budget that way. And then when we have to pass the millage, we figure out what we need to do with the millage to make that budget happen. We often forget that we change the budget every single meeting, all those things. And is that goal one, goal four, goal one? I mean, we're constantly changing the budget. So we can always go back and change the budget, but I would like us to begin to be forward thinking on here is the budget that would do everything we prioritize. Does that mean we always get to fund it fully? Maybe not, but at least we know what it would cost to fund that, rather than we have X amount of money, what can we fund? I hope I'm making sense there, and I would love to hear if anybody has thoughts on that, and if the superintendent has thoughts on that. But if that is something we can move forward, to me, that means January, February, March finance meetings would be, okay, if this is a priority, let's discuss that priority so that the district staff can come to us and say, this is how much that's going to cost. And then the next month, here is a priority, this is how much that's going to cost. Or here are things that we have discovered that aren't effective, let's remove them from our budget. So that we have all those discussions instead of having 5-minute discussions in June before we raise our hand. Yes, I'll go. Dr. Hoskins Brown, everybody has a, yay. People have thoughts. Dr. Hoskins Brown, then Ms. Hall, and then Ms. Grabowski.
Thank you. I think that's, I'm very supportive of that. I think that's really helpful. It moves the work of trying to analyze the budget from being individual homework, like if you take the initiative and try to work through the notebook and then come back and hope your comments are received in the meeting, and if they're not, that it doesn't, it makes it a much more transparent forward process. It also is a fundamental philosophical shift in what drives the budget. When we look at approving the budget in the summer, the brass ring is always how little can we change the millage rate in the positive direction, or what can we do to reduce the millage rate by working in the way that you describe. It makes, how is organizational effectiveness as discussed in the second quarter of the year, January, February, March, how is organizational effectiveness optimized? What are the budgetary needs for that? And what things have to shift to make those needs fit into the previous year's, because we'll have the previous year's number. How does it fit with the previous year's number? How does the previous year's number need to change in order to accommodate what we prioritize? There's going to be some bloodletting, though, because when we have that conversation, just like when you take your car to the shop, it's what does my car need? What do I want to pay to fix my car right now? It's going to be painful discussions in March, in April, and the community is going to come forward and let us know what they think about the things that we are considering cutting. Because my experience with the budget process is nobody ever wants to cut anything. Nobody. Internally, everyone thinks that they're getting the minimum that they need, and externally, no one wants to release something that's become part of their norms. So I like having the conversations earlier for all the reasons you said, and in addition, the fact that the public will no longer think that we're rushing them into a budget, that we're being opaque by, we're only going to bring it up now. You got 3 evening meetings and you better say something. We have the opportunity to demonstrate that we really do value their feedback. Thank you.
Ms. Hall?
Okay, so to that end, at some point soon, when the whole board is present, we need to decide on a date, because calendar mandates are that we have to have that out. So the sooner we can, as a group, decide and vote on that, the more we'll be ready to get on our way. The other thing is, since Mr. Jackson mentioned that this committee will cover all boats on the waterfront, I think we need people from all departments present. For instance, one of my big things is going to be staffing. And we don't have anybody from HR here, as far as I know, so that we don't have to wait and, it goes through the grapevine what we said. So if we could possibly have someone here from each department. And thirdly, Dr. Hoskins Brown was mentioning nobody wants to give up anything. We have to decide what worked and what didn't. So how do we do that? And I guess it's by a vote. This worked, this didn't. We're going to change, as opposed to everything just sounding wonderful and we go merrily along. So I guess we got to prioritize and then vote on those priorities to see that any meaningful changes made. Thank you.
My turn.
Yes, sorry, Ms. Grassi. Yes, go.
Thanks for getting the ball rolling. I think this is a great conversation. To me, I think we can pass the budget earlier. I think that's great. I'm less concerned about the timing and more concerned about the information and the process that we use to go into that. I think this is a great opportunity. I think Mr. Jackson alluded to this, for us to really take the time that we need to understand the complexities that are used to build the budget. So things I'm really interested in learning is more about, we talk a lot about how we supplement one of our largest costs of
Right.
human resources locally because of the limited dollars that we get from the QBE formula. So I'd really love for us to understand as a board and also communicate to the public what that looks like in a little bit more detail. Versus the buckets are great,
Right.
but it's hard to connect the buckets to the actual dollar spent, especially on the human resources side. As far as the process that we use, to me, I know that the superintendent is, and this goes back to our data and accountability department, I know the superintendent has taken a close look at our strategic plan and is going to be coming forward with some recommendations on that. And to me, that's where we start. We start with our strategic plan. How does that break into our goals and objectives? What's our work program that comes out of that? And what's the finances need to support that work program? And then when we're looking at effectiveness, what are the criteria that we are using to evaluate that work plan? And if something's not working, and if we're not seeing the data that supports the continuing revenue, then we cut it. And we, and then through that process, we're also able to prioritize what our financial needs are through the strategies and priorities of our strategic plan.
I think you've been inside of Dr. Watt's head. Yes, but to jump in, I'm going to just say this right quick before we move on. I want this committee to be more, I want what we bring to be more educational. We realize that we haven't done that so much in the past, but as I inform staff, every month I want us to bring something about the process. Next meeting, I want to talk about QBE and FTE and help you all understand that process, how we earn funding. Yes, you're asking the state to change the formula, but you need to understand what the formula is and what it does, how we get local revenue. And also, most of the time, we just talk about the general fund. I want to give other departments the opportunity to talk about federal grants and state grants and some of the other things that make up this budget. It's not just the general fund all the time. So, like I said, I just want to make this whole process more educational. Then the more you understand, the more you can feel our pain, but at least you know why we're making recommendations, that the ones that we make.
Yes, Dr. Hodson-Brown.
One other bit of information that I think is going to be kind of difficult to receive and difficult for us to assimilate, but something that was important to me some years ago, and it still is important, but I just kind of gave up on it, and that is what's happening with budgets at the facilities level. Like within each schoolhouse, what are we seeing in terms of utilization? What are we seeing in terms of effectiveness there? My perception, based on the answer I got to this question probably 8 or so years ago, was that needs were presented from unit leaders, from principals and other leaders up, and then those were kind of digested by the finance team, and modifications were made based on a number of factors: the amount of Title I funds coming in, other grants coming in. I still think that that's kind of a black box in terms of how we are really encouraging efficiencies at individual facilities. And I think that's important information to know for us, or at least either to acknowledge that it's kind of a gray area for us, or figure out ways to get better assessments. Because when parents come to us, like the parents who had concerns about athletics at New Hampstead, they are the users at the facilities level who are saying what their experience is. And just to ramble on a little longer, multiple times I've gotten solicitations from social groups that I'm in, my high school class or other groups, where we've been asked for money for things at a school where I know the school ought to have that money. There was even items that fell under an East Plus category. I'm like, I know we have money for those sorts of things because it's available from East Plus, but a previous principal was making an ask for things because they said they didn't have the money. Of course, it burned me up because, one, I knew the money was there, and two, it was creating this perception of being broke, and we weren't broke. And so I don't know how we can get to the financial user experience of the citizens that helps us see how things are running in the school, in individual schools. But I think that's an important bit of information because that's where parents and families get an idea of our financial health.
Yeah, that was something that was actually part of the current strategic plan, that we will monitor school spending. But monitoring school spending and making sure schools spend the money is two different things. And somehow my staff has to work with the school site administrators to help them understand what their budget is. And because we realize not all site administrators are finance people, sometimes they don't have the time to look at their budgets. But we're trying to encourage them to make it more of a team effort. Yes, you may not be the finance expert, but there may be somebody in your building that can help you do this and keep track of this and make sure funds are allocated. So it's kind of more of we really have to educate the school sites as well on what they have, the different types of funding that they have, and to try to spend it by a certain period of time. Because as we go through the budget process, we come around to April and pretty much we cut off spending in April. Because we feel that if we allocate you money at the beginning of the year, okay, you should have it spent before April and not wait until the end of the year to spend it. But it's more of an educational process. We're going to have to work with we have been working with our site leaders, but any suggestions that we can roll out would be appreciated. But like I said, I think it's going to take more of a team effort at that school to help us spend funds.
One moment, Ms. Hall, because I want to speak on that, and then I'll come to you. Is that okay? Mm-hmm. And again, this is me, so if the whole board doesn't, this is just me, driving around, finance committee, let's think about this. Is that, yes, we're coming up January budget. The next couple months will be really budget driven, but if this committee works the way it should, we should have almost a cyclical presentation schedule, but also a cyclical discussion schedule that will continue the month after and the months after we pass the budget. This being one of them, I think we could definitely spend a meeting going through what, we're talking about the budget of the district. Let's spend a meeting going through, just pick a school. What does the budget process of a school look like so that we understand that? So when Dr. Hoskins-Brown or another board member gets an ask, we're like, wait a second, let me pull it. I kind of know what your budget is supposed to look like. I can ask some questions and I can redirect you to the right people. And I think it will better help us as board members ask those constituents, answer the constituents when they have questions about that budget. But I think if we look at it at that level, then we might be able to help figure out a way to figure out where it's working. Right. The special sauce, I think that's your, yeah. And help find administrators that can help other administrators figure out that budget cycle. Because I definitely don't understand. I work for the state government, and it's always like, you got 2 days to come up with something to spend. Now go. So it always is like, I'm like, it's Friday at 4 o'clock, and you're telling me to give you something that's over this much money because we got to spend, and that doesn't make sense at all from a budget standpoint. So, Ms. Hall, go on ahead, and then we'll keep going around. And then, yep.
I'm going to tag right with you because that's what I was thinking about, administrators helping other administrators. I'm not going to mention any names, but I know a couple of schools where their finances are something that Berkshire Hathaway, would approve. So if we have the expertise like that, why are we not allowing those principals to help those who are struggling, those who are at the last minute, still have half of their budget left to be spent, and it's April. So give those principals a chance to mingle and talk and help each other, especially like new principals.
Exactly.
Here you have one who's been there 10 years and does very well. Here's one who's been there 2. Let them have their help, because I think that's easier than trying to get the whole 208,
Right.
administrative team into a school to help you, or to try to ask people in your school to do it. That might get a little, in terms of authority and stuff. But
Yeah.
let these administrators help each other.
That's true. And I do want to point out, in some districts, I don't know, probably in Texas, they actually have bookkeepers at each school site that handles the budget and handles the purchasing. I think many, many years ago, we used to have bookkeepers within our schools. We don't have those anymore. Now it falls on the principal and the secretary. But we're going to do all we can to educate those that are in the school building, hopefully get them to talk to each other, mentor each other, help each other out. But we're going to improve the process. I know Paige is back there taking notes, but that's one of the things we can do a presentation on next month as well, how we allocate funds to the schools, and we may pick a generic school and give you a view of, okay, here's all that they receive, and here's what they have control of at that school level. Some of it they don't have control of. For instance, if it's Title I, it's already in their plan. They have to spend it what they told the state and federal government they were going to spend the money on. But there's some of it where it's discretionary. They can spend it on whatever they like. But we'll bring that presentation next month as well.
Ms. Grabowski?
I think as far as the budgets at individual schools, to me, it's imperative that the leaders at those schools, the principals at those schools are financially savvy. I don't know how you get to be a principal and not have that as a skill. Because to me, you're like the CEO of that school. And so a part of that is that finance. So whatever, and I'm all for talk with colleagues and peers, but if we have the need for financial education for our principals, we absolutely need to make sure that we're providing that as part of that onboarding to becoming a principal. And I'm not saying we're not, but it sounds like there's a little bit of confusion about where that responsibility might lie. It doesn't mean you can't have somebody help and support, but at the end of the day, it's the principal's responsibility over that budget, I would think. And so we need to make sure that's real clear.
It is, and for the record, I'm not trying to throw the principals up on the bus. It's not all of the principals, but just every once in a while, there's a handful, and for various reasons, they just don't get the opportunity to spend all of the funds.
Yeah.
But there are various reasons why they don't do so.
Right.
It may be because they have this influx of federal funds, and they're trying to spend that first instead of spending the general funds. So there are a number of reasons why it doesn't occur.
Okay. Well, and maybe one of the ways that the district can support that is just providing some structure to that process that still gives them the flexibility to be able to adjust how they need. Because I know that's something that's also really important too, is to give them the autonomy that they need to be able to do what is most needed at their school. Dr. Brinkman mentioned earlier, one of the things that I'm interested in looking at in the Finance Committee is our procurement policy from a number of different levels, but I would throw into that, part of that is also at the school level. I know multiple instances where schools have had an opportunity to receive a donation from a particular vendor for something that the school needs, but they're not able to take it, they're not able to accept it because they have to go through the same procurement policy that the whole district does. I don't know what the answer is to that, but I feel like it is holding back some opportunities to have, some ways to be able to make improvements that are needed at our schools. But I also recognize there's a balance between making sure there's not favoritism. So I don't know what the answer is to that, but I'm just going to throw that out there, Dr. Brinkman, as something else for us to look at some point, whether it's this committee or somewhere else.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that because I think that's something else that's probably in the guidelines that we want this committee to be involved in the policy review for all of the financial policies that we have. We know most of them are up for. We do a 4-year review, but in between, there's some that we need to look at more often because things change from year to year and we have to make adjustments.
I'm going to kind of wrap up discussion and kind of throw out my thoughts on the next couple meetings, because we can't lump everything into January. Let's talk about it all in January. With being budget focused, that doesn't mean that every presentation that comes to us has to be budget focused, but as a board discussion point, I know that we'll have things coming from the district for us to review at each one of these meetings, but again, this is me thinking, so I want input. But January to me looks like taking Dr. Watts's 100-day plan that she, I'm sure, will link to priorities and goals, and us discussing, yes, we are in alignment with that as a board, and then that might actually happen in other board meetings as well, but coming back as the finance committee and going, yeah, these all line up. In February, we know staffing is always something that is going to be our priority, and I would like to dedicate February to what does that look like for all staffing? Okay, let's not just, teachers know, all staffing, what does that look like compensation-wise coming out of some of the federal funding that isn't all going to be there anymore? And then I would hope by March, we've got Ms. Taylor on board now, who's kind of digging into the district and looking at things that are working, things that aren't working, and by March, we might actually be able to have a discussion where we have to make some of those decisions that Dr. Hoskins Brown alluded to that aren't going to be comfortable, or might be, hey, that's not working, and everybody wants to get rid of it, and we can save money. I don't know if that'll happen, but that's my Christmas wish. So that by April, we will kind of have a better idea and just be able to discuss the budget more as a whole, so that come May, we can pass it as a board. I don't know. I'm just speaking, and
Yes.
people and
We can, 'cause that's-
Miss Cooley and
that's
Mr.
the
Jackson are like, oh my
practice.
gosh, oh my gosh.
I want to add one
I mean, but
thing.
that's been a practice of at least the metro Atlanta counties. They adopt their budgets in April or May, and they come back in June and do their military adoption. And if they need to make adjustments in July or August, they do so.
Yeah.
Well, I want to add to your January agenda, just looking at our financials, because at that point, we're at 50% of the academic year anyway. And sometimes I ask, hey, how come this line item has not been spent? And you say, oh, that's really going to get drawn down in April or March. Like it's the spending is not linear, and we know that, but it would be good to know if the things that should be spent down at 50% of the year are being spent down. And the other thing is, in March, we're adopting the draft. Do we want to adopt the budget? Because normally what we do is we adopt the draft in June, and then 2 weeks later, we adopt the final. So why are we not just adopting a draft in March and then finalizing it? If we're going to, rather than modifying the whole budget in August, why are we doing draft and final in Q2?
We're required to do a tentative adoption and publicize it, which will probably have to take place in April. Then we can do a final adoption in May.
And then we look at the millage rate, and then we may have to change. So why are we doing a final adoption in May if it's not required till later?
I have always wanted to take it out of the same discussion with the millage rate so that it makes us discuss the priorities, the goals, the hard questions, the cuts, the additions, rather than we've got some numbers from the county, and it looks like if we keep the millage rate this rate, we're going to have $50 million more dollars, and this is how we'll spend that $50 million.
Okay.
Rather than we have prioritized as a district and as a board a X% raise for staff, and it's going to cost this, and we're going to figure out how to pay it, rather than, oh, we've got some money. That makes sense?
I get it, but I guess I'm thinking is that in May, when we pass the final budget, or whatever time it is that we pass the final budget, then we've got to publicize that budget. We're going to print out all these budget books. We're going to put them in all the public libraries. We're going to do a full rollout of a finalized budget that we then are likely going to have to change unless we're not doing an absolute zero-based budget on our revenues. If we're not trying to account for every penny that may appear or disappear with the millage rate, then we're going to republish and do that process all over again. Or we're going to change our process and not put all the paper copies throughout the whole community and wait until July before we get the full publication of the budget. I'm just trying to, one, consider not redoing a whole lot of work that has a lot of personnel and expense associated with it. And also just wondering, I understand why you're decoupling it, but if we do a final budget in May, then we are inserting a lack of flexibility with the millage rate, because then we're going to be standing flat-footed and saying, well, we're not going to be entertaining any major changes in the millage rate because our budget is based on this. So it sounds like we are creating a financial standoff by creating the absolute final budget in May.
I can see it, but I definitely can see both sides of that coin.
Okay.
My personal is I would rather come to that financial standoff because we're supposed to prioritize what we think is going to move the district forward the best, rather than how can we move the district forward a little bit because this is how much we're going to get.
Okay. Well,
That's me. That's me.
and
And
that-
we're a
I'll-
committee.
yeah. You're the chair of this committee, and I'm okay with that. I'm just, all those years of being at Gould and playing chess during search just has me thinking about what's this next move going to be when we make this, decision. It may be that what we pass in May advertises to everyone that you're going to have a huge millage rate increase, because what we talked about in the spring necessitates this much larger pot of money. So then we're going to be fighting from May until July with the folks that don't want to see that increase, or we may approve something that doesn't have an increase early on, but revenues are short or something like that, and there's another big change. So it's expanding the community conversation and potentially the community conflict. And I just think that by voting on making it the final budget draws a line in the sand. And I'm okay. We fight about the budget every year. So it's not, are we going to fight? It's what we're going to fight over. So I'm okay with fighting. I was just asking what our thought process was in making that rigidity occur so early.
Yeah, and my thought process was, if we look at the budget outside of how much we're going to get, we might end up creating a budget that meets our priorities because we actually make some hard decisions before we know how much money is going to be on the plate, and we actually don't have to raise the millage. It could happen. I'm not saying one way or the other. I don't want to make any promises. It's just, if we take it away from this is how much we're going to get, so let's spend it, we can at least say, we prioritize this outside of our thoughts on how much money was going to be collected. We base this budget on what we believe to be the best for the district. And then, yes, we might have to go back, like we do every month, and make budget adjustments. I don't think we have to reprint the entire book when we make budget adjustments.
No, we won't.
But
We won't.
we make budget adjustments every single month with moving money around, so we might have to then make, but I do understand where you're coming from on, like, it's going to increase, I hope, community engagement. Mr. Moss asked a lot of people to show up this morning for like the last two board meetings. So Ms. Hall and then Mr. Moss, and then I'm going to get Mr. Jackson and his crew to start doing their presentations.
I think we might be able to come to a compromise with a draft, because a draft would leave us some flexibility, but we would also pretty much have come to a consensus about what's important. So we might be able to work that out. One thing I want to see is instructional outcomes before we do a final. Because if somebody has done a great job somewhere, I want to know what do we need to do to replicate that before we put all our money over here. And on another note, Mr. Jackson, I'd like to know how we pay our bills, because I too hear sometimes you would think that we are broke from what I hear people saying, or I see students out on the street, and I'm saying, why are you at the stoplight raising money for, I know we have money for you to have your whatever, uniform, whatever it is.
Right, right.
So if you could do a little tutorial on how quickly we're able to pay our bills. Can you remember when we owed the pizza guy for about a year?
Oh, my gosh.
So that would be interesting to see, to understand. From the day we, incur a bill, when do we actually pay it and it's off the books?
And can we note for the record that those stoplight begging activities are actually against policy?
They are, yeah, they're against
Okay.
policy, and they're
They're
illegal also.
Yes.
And I have found out that some principals did not know, so it's almost like, again, it has to be a tutorial all the way up and down, because I know those were moms out there. And PTA is different from school budget, but it just gave the impression that the schools don't have any money, and we know that's not so.
Mr. Moss?
Okay, so I'm going to echo something that you just said, Dr. Brinkman. And to those of you that are watching this on live stream, once again, these committee meetings are open to the public. I'm going to say this again. These committee meetings are open to the public. We encourage you to attend these committee meetings, because in these committee meetings, this is where a lot of the work is done. And so I can't encourage that enough. Number two, I'm going to go back to the discussion about principals and schools and all that, and this may come into the budgeting, but, principals like teachers, everyone needs professional development. And if financial literacy is part of that professional development, let's do it. Because, yes, I think principals have a general idea, but some principals have more financial background than others. So let's just give them all the same training. So that was it.
Dr. Brinkman, I know you're trying
Yes,
to move on,
that's
but can
fine.
I just, one quick last comment about, philosophically, I like your idea of separating the budget and the millage rate. Practically speaking, like if you think about your own personal budget, it's based on what your income is too. And so I think that's the other piece of it where I'm kind of still going back and forth, because philosophically I love, yes, what do we need to, and it may be that the draft and then the final later is a good way to look at that, just so we simply understand what our revenue stream is in the current state of the moment.
And I completely agree, and I've had those inner monologues, and then I go, wait a second, we get to vote on paying ourselves less or more every year. Which is slightly different than your personal budget, because I can't go to my boss and be like, so my priorities are a trip this summer that has me going to these places. I'm going to need you to pay me more or less. So yeah, I fully get that. And again, this is November. We're discussing it because we're trying to figure out what do we look like financially as a district moving forward. And I know we've had these conversations, sidebars about, well, we could do this, we could do that. There are other districts that have decoupled these. So we'll see. And, we can definitely still discuss. Nothing is getting nailed down today. Dr. Watts, any comment? Are you good right now?
It's been an affirming discussion. I think all of you have been in some way inside my head and my thinking and my discussions with Mr. Jackson, and we've already started internally talking about many of the same topics that have been highlighted today, so it's been affirming. I'm excited that while my Listening and Learn tour is expiring in just a couple of days, this is the first time that I'll be involved in the process. So I'm excited about being able to influence it, taking some of the suggestions. I took copious notes during the discussion to be able to deliver on some of the things that you have asked, which I think are all really great suggestions. And I'm excited about this committee being a thought partner with us as we chart the path forward. So thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Jackson.
Yes.
Go.
All right. The next item that we were supposed to have was a review of the American Recovery Program. And Chair, if you don't mind, can we postpone that until the next meeting? The compensatory program director was supposed to do this presentation, and I would love for her to do it because she was scheduled to talk about some of the other federal grants as well. So I'd rather her give you the entire picture.
Sounds great.
All right, so we'll move on to the part one of the fund balance review and long-range planning. So again, this is part one. We'll surely have a part two or part three. So I'm going to have our controller, Teresa Seeley, come forward and make this presentation. And also want to point out, over the next few months, you will see more members of my finance team coming to make presentations. So she's the first of a few.
Good morning.
Morning.
Now, I may not know how to move through this, so hold on. Okay, okay, good. All right, so what you have in front of you is a 10-year general balance from 2013 to 2022. 2023 has not been finalized yet. We're in the final home stretches of that process. So you can see in 2013, we began at 29 million, and in 2022, we're at 151 million. The next slide is basically the budgetary comparison. So your green is what we projected that fund balance to be, and the yellow is what we actually ended at. We then wanted to show you that the district strives to maintain a minimum unassigned fund balance of no less than 3 months of annual budgeted expenditures. This minimum fund balance is to protect against cash shortfalls related to timing of projected revenue receipts and to maintain an emergency funding source. Should the unassigned fund balance exceed 5 months of budgeted expenditures, the district will utilize the funds for one-time expenditures that are non-reoccurring or consider transferring excess funds to a separate capital accumulation fund. 15% is what the state looks at and our auditors look at. And you can see before 2020, the fund balance was always below the 3 months or the 15%. During the COVID pandemic, collections did not decrease while our expenditures did. So you can see that shift after 2020, that we have more than the 15% and more than the 3 months. But if we hadn't increased the millage, we would have probably been about below that, as you can see in the prior years. Does anyone have any questions?
Go on ahead, Ms. Hall.
So what is the plan? Can we go back to the last screen?
Ooh, let me see. The last screen? This one?
So, do we get some sort of admonishment from the state, or what is it that we plan to do to get this in order?
We're still, actually, good question. We're still working on a plan for the FY24 budget. We actually budgeted to use some fund balance. We
You're saying
do
the
have
on
some.
one time, like they would say, one time.
There were some
can I-
expenses, and we still have some one-time expenses that we may have to bring to the board before the end of this year, and that's, part of it's going to be part of the facilities plan, part of it is going to be dealing with our textbook adoption, part of it is dealing with capital equipment that we need to replace in some of the new schools that we've built over the last few years. Part of it's going to be some of the maintenance that we need to do in some of our buildings. So if
But
you
this
look.
is all general, this is not anything to do with East Plus, am I right?
Nothing to do with East
Just
Boston.
talking about our general fund.
We're talking about the general
Right.
fund, and those are expenditures that need to come out of the general fund. So over the next few months, we're going to work on the plan for the use of fund balance, along with plans for the facilities long-range plan as well. That's going to have a great impact on that use of fund balance. Then we may look at using fund balance over the next few years to get it to a point where it balances out. We realize not just our school district, but all pretty much districts and county governments have experienced the same bubble over the last 2 or 3 years because of the pandemic. Either they received revenue from additional houses being built, the decrease in expenditures because people were not working, and the use of ESSER funds. So basically, all governments kind of experienced this bubble for over the last 3 years, but that bubble is not going to continue. So we have to figure out how do we balance that out over the next 4 or 5 years. So
Well,
that's the plan we're
okay.
working on.
Mr. Chair, I would think that this is of top priority for us to get our arms around, wrapped around, and hopefully we'll not have another COVID experience. So how do we manage this so that, because this looks exorbitant.
Yes, and correct. And if you go back to our budget discussions, this is one of the things that Mr. Katchmar was trying to bring up with, if we were, these look exorbitant. I mean, that 126 to 151 million, that's a big jump. And we're doing exactly what we don't want our teachers to do, spending money in April. We're saying, oh, we have this extra money and we got to spend it, rather than, and I'll let Mr. Katchmar share some space here. We're putting stuff into operations one time instead of building operations into our budget to make sure that we're keeping up with stuff. Again, that's kind of why I'm in favor of moving this out of how much money are we actually going to have into this is what we need to do to make it the way we prioritize it. And that might be a utopian budget that's perfect, and we might have to come back and go, okay, and now reality says this. And then we have to have, as Dr. Hoskins-Brown said, the hard conversations. And I think that's what we're elected to do. But this can't keep happening, and maybe it is just a bubble, but we need to make sure that if we think there are things that we're spending this money down to get us back to the green line that need to be in our budget all the time, they're in our budget all the time. And then, or if it keeps going like this, we need to be informed enough to go, oh, we don't need to collect as much money because we have a healthy fund balance. And if we continue to keep at this millage rate, it's going to keep being this bubble. Right. So let's change. Yeah. So those are just some of my thoughts. I had Ms. Grabowski and then Dr. Hoskins-Brown.
Have we done a fiscal cliff analysis to really forecast how the ESSER funds and those one-time funding streams will cut off and what that gap looks like based on how we've been spending? Does that make sense?
Yes, that was part of the presentation that you missed, and we'll probably adjust the presentation to include those numbers of things that, excuse me, we may need to include in the general fund moving forward that we want to continue doing.
Okay. Yeah, exactly.
we are
'Cause
working
I
on
think
that.
that's what we need to be thinking
Correct.
about is if we've kind of changed some norms, but we recognize those are norms we want to keep. So what is
Correct.
that? And that gap is going to now grow. So I think that's what we need to be able to see. So if that's part 2, I look forward to it.
Yes, that's going to be part of the budget process itself, that we include those items.
Because if you think about the 3 CARES, you have 10 million, 44 million, and then about 50 million spent in the last 3 years. And if you look at our fund balance there, you got to consider when that money's gone, we got to make sure we're looking ahead.
Well, and to the point, you talked a lot about the facilities plan. And on the facility side, I'd really love for us to start going to a life cycle analysis model where when we are doing renovations in new schools, we are able to forecast out the maintenance as a part of that. And to Dr. Brinkman's point, it just gets folded in automatically to what we need to be able to do because we're not including that, I don't think, the way that we need to be to make sure that we're maintaining and sustaining the investments that we're making sometimes.
Dr. Hoskins-Brown?
Thank you. My question was just about the criteria. I know that we've talked about this in the past for spending fund balance, and I think you gave 3 of them. just for the record, what is that? That's non-recurring expenses. What were the other?
The committed, the assigned, and the unassigned? Is that what you were talking about? The
No,
pieces?
on slide, on working fund balance, when we spend the amount that falls above the green line,
Okay.
it's one time, non-recurring.
Oh.
You rattled off those
Yep.
criteria really quick. And
One-time expenditures that are non-recurring or considered transferring excess funds to a separate capital accumulation fund.
so that's not a spend. That's transferring the excess transferring the
To a
excess.
separate, and this is all can be found in your ASFR. So all the information that we provided today, you can go back into any prior year ASFR and
What's
review
now the
it.
CAFR? The ASFR is what's now what used to be the CAFR?
Yes, sorry.
Okay. It's our accounting tome.
Again,
Yeah.
to Mr. Moss's
Thank
point,
you.
if
Thank
we
you.
could please.
Thank you.
letters
Yeah,
mean?
Yeah, well, those
yeah.
letters mean.
Are standing for.
Thank you.
It was once called the CAFR and now the ASFR, yes.
Mr. Bremen, how would that be any different from a fund balance if we put it in a special capital? I mean, it would just be another name, but we'd still be.
The auditors consider that assigned, that you have it assigned to
Oh, it's
something.
assigned.
And that's what the Atlanta school system does. They're always over that 15%.
Uh-huh.
And they have it, they're able to speak to that as assigned projects.
And we just haven't been doing that in prior years.
That's a
be-
good tutorial
Because we
for
had
us,
never had
too.
that excess, but we can assign it for future, capital improvement needs. Just that simple.
Okay, that's a good tutorial for the whole board.
Moving on.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bucket lady.
Good morning, everyone.
I don't know, right?
Use the keyboard.
Okay. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
It's good to see everyone again. I feel like it's been a while since I've been here. I'm going to go over some of our budget process for this year, and like Dr. Brigman was talking about, I've got a calendar on here, but of course, it looks like we may need to make some adjustments based on what is decided by the board. First, I want to talk about our budget objectives. Our budget objective 1 is a student-focused budget, as we all know, for the best educational opportunities for every student. Our goal 2, which goes with our budget objective number 2, engage stakeholders and encourage participation and obtain their perspectives and values. We are already working on that for next year. This month, I talked with our professional senate, and I just got really excited. They were such a participatory group, asked a lot of questions, and literally had to call the meeting to tell it to stop because there was so much participation and discussion. And I've already sent program improvements out to them because they were wanting to get involved in it too and offer their suggestions, because I was asking them, what can we do? Our vacancies are very high. What can we do to support the schools? So they were asking a lot of questions. I think they learned a lot. I learned a lot from them. And so we've already given them the budget survey, and we're going to be rolling that out soon for everyone else, so we can start getting community stakeholders and the board for that. Our third budget objective is our compensation plan. We'd like to have a competitive compensation plan to retain our current employees, be able to recruit future employees, and that was one of the things that was talked a lot about at the Professional Senate too. And I think it's going to be a major portion of our budget is the compensation. We have a tremendous hundreds of vacancies in almost every area that's very important to our district. And I know that money is not everything, but from what I got from the Professional Senate, it does mean a lot. We know that teachers are not paid as much as they should be. I've read article after article that they do not make what their people in the private sector with their level of education brings in. So I think we have to realize that. There's other choices for people at this time with virtual and stuff. It used to be that some people would do teaching because it was a good job to be able to be home with their children when they were off and stuff, but we have to look at the future of our society, and there's a lot more opportunities out there for people. We need to look at what will bring people into teaching in colleges, supporting them, making sure they're paid properly. So that's going to be always a big part of the budget. I would like for us to look at, making sure that we do a nice compensation again this year or for next year. And then goal 4, sustaining a healthy fund balance for the handling of emergencies and unanticipated expenses, which is what Mrs. Seeley just talked about. I will say that one of the reasons that our fund balance has gotten higher in the past couple of years is due to vacancies. The way we budget is we base it on who is here right now, this year, and if we know they're there, and we put in the vacancies for the staffing, and that's all based on enrollment. But we have a lot of vacancies, and I am not going to not budget exactly, for those vacancies. Now, this is where discussions may need to be changed. I have been building in a $6.5 million vacancy factor so that, the time it takes when people leave and then we hire someone new, it's 6.5 has always been what we've used. Maybe it needs to be higher if we're going to continue having these sort of vacancies. But if we were fully staffed, we would not have a fund balance. In fact, I'd be worried. So we have to realize that too. If we're going to try to get a full staff, that's what's giving us that fund balance, the majority. When you look at the budgeted amount, if you were looking like Mrs. Seeley's was the actuals, but if you had taken the budgeted amount, it would have been right at, the budgeted amount a month is around 50 million or more if we're fully staffed. So 150 million is not over. But because we have not been fully staffed and we have quite a number of vacancies, hundreds, that is why our fund balance is looking so high. It's really not if we were fully staffed.
Ms. Cooley, are you okay taking questions as they
Oh,
arise?
yes, I'd love that.
Ms.
I
Hall,
love
go
it
on
when
ahead.
it's participating.
About to jump out of this seat. They're always, and I don't know, Denise, if you and Dion and David, if y'all can remember this, but there always seems to be a disconnect between our finance department and HR. And that goes all the way back to our deciding to bring our staff, our people, up to $15 an hour. You remember that whole situation. So everything that you're saying is, it just rings so true. Where is HR on all of this? And if I came and applied today for one of your vacancies, today is November 29th. How long is it before I'm actually on the job? Because that makes a difference in whether I come to you. If everything we have to go through, I'm not working until January 10th, and I need to pay bills next week. So all of that, David, since, this finance committee covering everything, all of those things have to be taken into consideration. And I still feel, Paige, every time I hear you and Mr. Jackson present, that you're talking about a whole different world from the world of HR. And anything we can do to make A and B equal, I think is going to help us. Okay, thank you for letting me say that.
Mr. Grabowski?
So I know that the superintendent has commissioned a compensation study. Is that correct? So I think, Ms. Hall, that's going to be the ideal point for us to take a deep dive and look at, I hear you on the process part too, because that is important, but I'm very excited to see what that study shows us. So I think it's going to be some great information. And Ms. Cooley, thank you for making that clarification about the presentation we just saw about the general fund, because I think that is critically important. And I would even suggest that maybe for future presentations, we add another line that's the budget and a side note that says fully staffed, because, I mean, that detail is huge in my mind in understanding the general fund and any excess that we have in that general fund balance.
Thank you.
Mr. Moss?
Thank you very much, and I agree that shines a totally new light on that general fund. Compensation and retention, and I'm going to speak to retention. I think, well, I know. One thing that I would like, I'm going to do a David here. I'm speaking for myself right now. But I would like to see more of compensation attached to performance. Yes, there's a general base that I believe everyone should have. But what are we doing for those teachers that are going that extra mile? How are we rewarding them? Because, I would stay at a job that really appreciated me and showed that they appreciated me, as opposed to, well, I was here another year and I got a raise. So I think as we go forward, I would like to explore what are we doing to reward performance. So that's it.
Thank you, Mr. Moss.
Ms. Cooley, go on ahead. Thank you.
This is our tentative budget calendar, and as you can see, we may be changing some of the items around. The big thing we're working on in the budget office right now is in our enrollment, and that will also be contingent upon what the board decides maybe at the next meeting with all of the school sites. So we are a little behind right now because we can't send those out to the principals because our process with enrollment involves we try to get input from everyone, first the principals at the school sites so they can let us know things we may not know. A new apartment complex in their district is being built, which would bring in more kids than maybe the way we had projected it, that sort of thing. So right now, we are waiting to see where students will be at what schools, because that will determine our budget, because it is the staffing, which that covers 85% of our budget is salaries and benefits. So we can't do anything until we know what our staffing will be and where it will be, so we can let the schools know how much money they have. So as far as that on here, one thing when we talked about doing the budget earlier, we do need to also consider that we do have to have public hearings on the budget. That's not the millage rate hearings, there's other ones. So if we do go with the May adoption, we would need to know that we would need to back up some of the public hearings to get input at earlier dates than we have done in the past. So that will kind of bring the calendar, all of this will kind of shift differently and earlier. On this one, I just wanted to point out that the big one on this is in April right now, for April 23rd and April 30th, the board public hearing on the budget that would be held. We would advertise it in April and have it on May 8th and 15th. Obviously, that would need to be done earlier if we do a May adoption. So I will back that up if that is decided. So yeah, whenever it is decided, please just let me know as soon as possible so I can make adjustments to the budget. On the next slide, 5, the big ones here were advertising for the public hearing, and right now I have the tentative budget and tentative millage rate adoptions on June 5th. I have the board public hearings 1 and 2 on June 12th, And then the third one these are all kind of based on what we did last year. The third one would have been on June 19th, which is Juneteenth, which is a holiday that we usually try to keep everything on Wednesdays. But if, for the millage rate, we're looking at either June 20th, which is that Thursday right after Juneteenth, or June 26th, which would be the next Wednesday. So we are, whatever works best for the board members, we can go either way on that. That is the millage rate. Even if y'all decide that you would prefer to have the budget done in May, we will still need to have the hearings on the millage rate. So that kind of concludes the calendar, and I think if anybody, Mr. Moss, are you?
So, June 12th, the board millage rate public hearing. So we're doing, let me make sure I'm looking at this the right way. We're doing 2 in that one day?
Yes.
I know we've always done that, but.
We have
but-
to have 3. We don't
I
have to do it on
understand.
one day. We've always done one like at 11 because it has to be one that's a morning, so people that work evenings will have a chance to come to that, and then we've done the one in the night. Now, this is all,
I
we can
understand.
change that, but this is the way we've always done the 2, one at 11 and one at 6 p.m. on the same day, and then we would do the third one on the evening. Now, that is certainly, I can change that around in any way that suits the board better. As long as we follow the rules, we do have to have one, at least one morning and at least one
Oh, you have
evening.
to have one in the morning?
Have to have one in the morning
Okay,
and one in the
that-
evening so
you
that
just answered my
everybody has a
question.
chance
That's
to
fine.
attend.
That's fine.
Dr. Hoskins Brown?
Thank you. Aren't our commencement activities that week of the 15th of May?
Pardon?
I've got the commencement activities that week of May 15th. I don't know, that's what I'm asking. I mean, I put in a placeholder that I got from somewhere. I just am trying to.
I put that placeholder in my thing, so.
I will certainly check on that.
I'd love to know those dates.
We'll double check that. In fact, the board does have an agenda item coming up December 6th for the venue, which will be brought before you for adoption, and we'll specify those dates. I will have to double check that as well, but my initial feeling on week of May 15th is that the graduation ceremonies are a little later than that. But we will verify that, but we will definitely have that answer by the December 6th board meeting.
Yeah, the last day of school is May 22nd, and that's usually the week of graduation, so it would be the week of the 20th, I believe, would be. But
Okay, well, I have a placeholder from somewhere, so I'll be happy to delete it because it's blocking my whole week, but I'm going to hold it until I get an answer.
The items of focus for next school year are student enrollment trends and birth rate declines. We saw a decline of 427 students this year's 10th day compared to last year's. So for next year, we have a lot of stuff coming in, but right now, we're looking at keeping the enrollment the same next year. That's subject to change, but if I was just looking at it as just based on historical data, we would continue to decline, but I just keep seeing all this come in. But we haven't seen those students yet. So I don't really want to go down on the size of the enrollment because we do have such trouble with vacancy and teachers, so I don't want to see us reduce the number of teachers. We always have room for more teachers, so I would like to, for next year, keep the enrollment the same as this 10th day enrollment. But so that's one of the things, but we have been seeing a decline in birth rates. And we're looking at next year, we go back 5 years to see how many children were born in Chatham County 5 years ago for kindergarten. And it's, that's not just a Savannah situation, it's a nationwide trend. So we are seeing quite a bit of decline in students. Staffing stability and rising compensation costs are also items of concern. As I talked about earlier, obviously we need to compensate staff so we won't have so many vacancies. But that's extremely expensive. That is pretty much, as I said, 85% of the budget. And so when we go up, the budget goes up quite a bit. Literacy, as we all know, that's been a major focus this year with the extra literacy teachers and all the staff we have added this year. So of course, that will continue to be an area of focus for next year. Recession indicators and the decline of state revenue. Our area seems, it doesn't look like we're going to have a big decline even possibly with next year because we are growing so much, but the state as a whole isn't necessarily. I just saw an article I read where I was really surprised to see Atlanta was on a list if you bought a house in 22 that it had gone down in cost. We're not seeing that in Savannah yet, but I was kind of shocked Atlanta because it showed the 20 top cities that were one of the largest and which ones had gone down from people that bought a house in 2022 as to what the house was worth this year if they were selling it. And Atlanta was in there, and I was shocked. So, I mean, that will affect state possible revenues. I think we've been healthy as a state so far, but we have to prepare for that. Federal stimulus spending and reoccurring cost impact. Obviously, as they were talking earlier about our CARES, our ARP money, that's coming to a close, so that's going to affect us, and that's an area of focus. And our continued financial stability, as was spoken about earlier, the fund balance. It looks like we have a lot of money. It's really not that much if we're fully staffed. We're looking at 3 months. So that's, I think, Mr. Jackson has done a terrific job of pulling us. When he came into the position, the fund balance was scary, and he has brought us through COVID, as well as all the other cabinet members and the superintendent, and Dr. Watts is doing that now and keeping us so we don't worry like other places have had to. I feel like even though COVID did bring a lot of worries, we didn't worry like some. We knew we could, continue to operate financially. These are our budget process resources: the superintendent's 100-day plan, our board strategic plan, the status report on federally identified schools, Board of Education 2024 legislative priorities, staff and community feedback. And anybody has any questions or discussions?
Thank you, Ms. Cooley. Any questions? Yes, Ms. Gorowski.
Going back to the calendar, at slide 5, on I know we do the tentative budget, or the tentative millage rate. I'm going to take budget out because that's still unknown about the schedule. So we have the tentative millage rate adoption, and then we have the final later in June. It seems to me that we should have one of our public hearings before we do our tentative millage rate adoption, so that we can hear from the community in advance of that adoption. I don't know how others feel, but I'll just throw that out there as a suggestion.
Okay.
Adoption of the
That we would hold.
Public hearings on the
that
millage
we would
rate?
have at least one of our public hearings prior to our tentative millage rate adoption.
It's a state law requirement. We have to do them after we do the
Oh.
tentative adoption.
Really?
Yeah.
That
Because
just
we have to
seems-
advertise
okay.
it, then do the hearing.
So we have to adopt we have to adopt the tentative before we can hold a public hearing?
If we do one before, it would create a fourth hearing. We can do the hearing as part of the budget hearings and talk about the millage rate. But we have to, if we decide not to roll back the millage rate, we have to do 3 hearings after we do the tentative adoption.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying. I know. It just seems kind of odd.
Yeah. It's just state law.
We've had a lot of discussion about the calendar, and I have, thrown my wrenches from the very get-go into it because we've had discussions. And I don't see it as the committee's responsibility or just the board's ability to say, we are passing a budget in this month, because I see our job as board members as we pass a budget for the district to do what we see and prioritize. So I would like to, not change anything right now, discuss with the superintendent, who is coming up with her 100-day plan, discuss with the district on what that looks like, and if we take a bit of Ms. Hall's ideas on this is when we would have our draft in May or not, and it's pretty much December. Is this, too accelerated for this year with all the changes we've already had? But we'll definitely work with the superintendent and district staff to figure out what that ideal calendar looks like if we want to really, and it might stay the same as Dr. Hoskins-Brown said, but we reprioritize that we are going to build a budget out of priorities and goals rather than a budget out of how much money we're going to have on the table is what my feeling has been in the past years. Any other discussion, comments? On the future dates, I will figure out who really wants to be on the committee so that we can make sure that those committee members can slice their time up. I like the Wednesday morning because Wednesday is typically, I've already figured out my schedule around so I can have the Wednesday off for a board meeting, so it's easier for me to just keep that morning open. But we'll not set any dates right now, but know that I want to have a finance committee meeting at least each month, barring December, because it becomes its own nightmare, so that we continue to have presentations, but so that we as board members continue to have discussion so that it doesn't feel like in the budget process, we're discussing everything with a few days' notice. Yes, Dr. Hoskins-Brown.
You said that we're not voting in committee meetings, so we're not voting on anything ever?
This is an advisory committee.
Okay, so it's different from our other committees where we do vote on things like board accountability and audit.
I didn't know you voted in board accountability.
Well, just for clarification on that, yes, the vote is a recommendation.
There you go, okay.
Recommendation to
the
the board,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, okay, yes. Okay, I'm sorry.
So we still will be voting on, potentially on things?
On recommendations, yes,
recommendations.
but nothing that actually changes until it goes before the entire board.
Okay, so the reason I ask is because I'm interested and I would be willing to serve, but 12 Wednesdays for 2 hours starting at 9 o'clock is a heavy lift for me to be in person at all times.
Correct.
And the issue about connecting virtually has been raised in audit, in which Mr. Holliday has indicated that board committee, his interpretation is that board committees have to follow the same quorum. I'm just telling you. what he
Yeah, I
said.
got you.
His interpretation is that board committees have to have a quorum present before a virtual option is available. And I don't have the capacity to serve on committees that refuse to have a virtual option. So that's why I'm asking those questions.
Yeah, and I want to have a meeting every month so that we don't fall into some of the same routines that we've had prior in budget where we don't meet.
Correct.
Yes, Ms. Hall and then Ms. Grabowski.
It certainly is wonderful when we have those Wednesday meetings when the whole board happens to be here. We've been doing that a little bit, adding that 10 o'clock time to our board meeting day, and so much gets accomplished. I'm just wondering if there's some way,
That's another big add.
We can't do it. If this is going to be monthly, by definition, we can't do that because we've already put board accountability before
that's
the
right,
board meeting.
that's right.
So we only
already have that.
we only have 12 Wednesdays for board meetings.
We'll start meeting at 6 for the true board meeting, and we'll just have all the committee meeting, and we'll just be here. I'm totally joking. Ms. Grabowski?
If we are going to be meeting monthly, Ms. Hall made the comment earlier about having all of our department heads here, and I would be concerned that that is an awful lot of staff time to be tying up of all of our department heads once a month for committee
Well,
meetings.
someone from the department, not
yeah, I mean,
necessarily
if
the head
there's-
all the time.
Well, but if there's somebody, I mean, if we have something on the agenda that's specific.
Correct.
I mean, I just want to be sensitive to staff time because that is an awful lot of time for them to.
Maybe once a month is too much. I just thought once a month would keep us actually discussing, and if we're broadening it out of budget to finance, we've got so many other pieces for us.
Especially this time of year.
Yes.
Maybe it's every 6 weeks.
Well,
Split the
and
difference.
the testimony for someone who used to have a monthly meeting that went to less than a monthly meeting is that you're not saving time because now you're having longer meetings when you convene.
Yeah.
So a monthly meeting, like audit does, it stays an hour because you don't have that much business that's left over from the last meeting. So like I said, I don't love adding another monthly meeting, especially starting at 9. The reality is that the amount of work that needs to be done on this process and to feel good about this investment, to feel good about the investment of time that the district is putting in creating a finance committee and getting the reports generated. It's not really effective if we have staff put the effort in doing all this data analysis and then we don't meet and, to really go over it. Board accountability moving to less than monthly has increased the amount of work that needs to be discussed at each meeting or has forced us to cull our agenda for things that are really most important. And I don't think that's caused a problem, but that's something to be aware of when part of the purpose of this committee is to facilitate timely discussions of programming that affects how we develop our budget.
David, would having June, July, August off, do you really need a meeting those months?
Yeah, I would think that there would be months that we wouldn't have meetings because there aren't as many things going on in the district.
Right.
But understanding when we ramp up in August and September, that's when I think you go to a discussion on procurement, and you go to a discussion on let's take a school and break down their budget so we understand their budget cycle. And then having a cyclical ramp up in November, December, January for the budget, whatever that looks like, building it out from whatever we decide to be if we stick with a June budget adoption, if we go to a May, but having more of a cyclical discussion so that we're prioritizing what the district is prioritizing, and the district is able to bring to us things that, we need to know, like, if we were fully staffed, there wouldn't be that money, or here's the money we're losing because that federal money is going away. Here are the things that we're going to have to change. And I believe with Dr. Watts and Ms. Taylor, here are the things that we have really dug deep and figured out we need to get rid of. Or here's a place where we have found a problem. We need to change the budget now to fix this hole in the bucket. So that's why I wanted it to be more frequent, and it just holds us, I think, as board members more accountable to actually being in one of our primary responsibilities, the fiscal responsibility of the district. Mr. Moss?
So, could I suggest that, I think because this is the new way of doing things, and I'm very happy with this, I'm excited about this. Could we prioritize? You're so sweet. Could we prioritize? Fancy notes. Could we prioritize January through April that we do have meetings every month? And then when we get into the later months, we don't have to have them as frequently. But I think those 4 months, I think it's crucial.
Yes, I'm amenable to that. It's all new. That's, I think, why this meeting has gone on longer than they typically will, is because we're all in a generative state, and I'm sure I'm just wanting to drive Kurt nuts. Yes, was that Ms. Hall? Did you have something, or just Dr.? Okay, Dr. Hawkins-Brown.
One more thing on the attendee. So, being sensitive to Ms. Grabowski's point about having all the staff show up for everything, one best practice that may be good to adopt that we've used with board accountability is that I work with Mr. Feliciano and his team on an agenda far before that meeting And there's a suggestion of these are the things that cover, what will you add, and then we agree who needs to be present. And then those persons get notified of, what their role and contribution is. So there will be conversations because we don't have, and, human resources needs to be present.
For staffing.
So
Procurement needs to be here when we talk about procurement, yeah.
So that's one way to be really efficient and make sure that they get the heads up on what they are expected to contribute to the conversation, so they're prepared and not caught cold in a discussion as well.
I see no other hands.
Every time, though, we can always tell you what- And Mr. Feliciano.
I will take a motion to adjourn. Did you have any, Dr. Watts? Nope. Yeah, I ain't gotten there. Okay. And Denise is just looking out for another Denise. Hearing no other, thank you so much, and I look forward to future meetings.